The Eyes Above Clingmans Dome. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you looked into the darkness, and the darkness looked back? Every mountain has its legends. Every forest has its secrets. But some places hold stories that are never meant to be told. Welcome back to the channel, where we explore the most terrifying true legends, unexplained disappearances, and horror stories hidden in the forgotten corners of America. If you enjoy eerie mysteries, haunted locations, and stories that will make you think twice before stepping into the woods alone, you're in the right place. Tonight's story takes us to the highest peak in the Great Smoky Mountains, a place visited by millions every year, where breathtaking views hide an unsettling secret that locals rarely speak about after sunset. This is the story of the Eyes Above Clingmans Dome. Clingmans Dome stands more than 6,600 feet above sea level, rising through the ancient Great Smoky Mountains like a lonely stone watchtower over endless waves of forest. During the day, tourists crowd its observation tower with cameras in hand, hoping to capture panoramic views stretching across Tennessee and North Carolina. Families laugh as children race along the paved walkway, photographers wait patiently for sunrise, and hikers proudly mark another destination crossed off their bucket lists. On the surface, nothing seems unusual. The mountain appears peaceful, almost welcoming, wrapped in cool mist and the scent of spruce and fir trees that have stood for centuries. But the atmosphere changes with frightening speed when the sun disappears behind the ridges. Rangers quietly encourage visitors to leave before darkness settles in, offering practical explanations about dangerous wildlife, low visibility, and unpredictable mountain weather. Few people question the advice. Those who do often wish they had. For decades, scattered reports have surfaced from hikers who insisted they saw something impossible high above the treetops. They never described an animal. They never claimed to see a ghostly figure. Instead, they all focused on the same chilling detail: two enormous crimson eyes suspended in the darkness far above the forest canopy. The eyes never blinked. They never moved like the headlights of a distant vehicle or the reflection from an owl. They simply hovered, watching silently from impossible heights. Witnesses often became too frightened to continue speaking, and many refused interviews after sharing their experiences with local authorities. Some later claimed they had imagined everything. Others packed their belongings and moved away from nearby towns without explanation. Yet one disturbing detail remained consistent across nearly every account: no camera ever captured the eyes. Modern technology should have solved the mystery years ago. Smartphones, professional DSLR cameras, thermal drones, even night vision equipment have all been carried to Clingmans Dome by curious investigators hoping to expose the legend as another internet myth. Each time, the result was the same. The people behind the cameras swore they were staring directly at two glowing red eyes hanging over the trees. They described them in perfect detail while recording. But when they reviewed the footage later, the sky appeared completely empty. No lights. No strange reflections. No unexplained figures. It was as though whatever they had seen refused to exist inside a photograph. The recordings became even stranger when investigators increased the audio volume. Hidden beneath the sounds of wind and rustling leaves was something no one remembered hearing at the time: a slow, impossibly deep breathing. Audio experts examined several recordings over the years, believing the sound might have been caused by mountain winds flowing through the observation tower or distant wildlife echoing across the valleys. Their conclusions never matched the recordings. The breathing possessed rhythm. It inhaled slowly, paused for several seconds, then exhaled with a low vibration that resembled lungs far larger than any known animal in the Smokies. Spectral analysis revealed subtle frequencies too low for most people to hear naturally, yet microphones captured them with startling clarity. Some recordings lasted only a few seconds. Others continued for nearly 5 minutes. None contained visual evidence of anything unusual. It was as if the microphones heard a living presence that cameras could not perceive. Local residents rarely discussed these stories with outsiders, but among older generations living near the national park, whispers persisted. Grandparents warned children never to remain on the observation tower after twilight. Hunters refused to enter certain sections of the forest once evening fog rolled in. Volunteer search and rescue teams quietly noted that missing person incidents seemed to increase during late autumn, when dense clouds covered the summit and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Official reports blamed accidents, sudden weather changes, or hikers leaving marked trails. Those explanations satisfied most people. They did not satisfy everyone. Among the skeptics was 28-year-old documentary filmmaker Ethan Mercer. Ethan had built a modest following online by investigating supposedly haunted locations across the United States. Unlike many paranormal creators, he disliked exaggerated reactions and staged evidence. His audience appreciated his calm approach, careful research, and willingness to debunk false claims whenever possible. If a haunted building creaked because of old plumbing, Ethan would explain it. If mysterious lights turned out to be passing aircraft, he would show flight records. He believed every mystery deserved a rational explanation before anyone blamed the supernatural. When viewers repeatedly requested that he investigate Clingmans Dome, Ethan initially ignored the suggestion. The stories sounded too repetitive and strangely convenient. Giant red eyes that never appeared on camera? Breathing only microphones could detect? It reminded him of internet folklore designed to spread through forums and late-night podcasts rather than genuine eyewitness accounts. But as weeks passed, the requests continued arriving from people who claimed they had personally visited the mountain. Some described seeing the eyes themselves. Others shared recordings containing faint breathing that no one could explain. A retired park volunteer sent Ethan a lengthy email insisting the phenomenon had existed long before smartphones, YouTube, or social media transformed local legends into viral entertainment. Attached to the email were scanned newspaper clippings dating back to the late 1970s describing frightened hikers reporting glowing eyes suspended above the trees. The language differed, but the details remained remarkably consistent. Curiosity slowly replaced skepticism. Ethan spent nearly 2 months researching the mountain before deciding whether to travel there. He read geological surveys, weather reports, wildlife studies, Native American folklore, ranger logs, and archived newspaper articles. Most sources dismissed the sightings entirely. Yet buried among thousands of ordinary reports were strange incidents that refused to fit neatly into any explanation. Multiple hikers independently described hearing slow breathing with no visible source. Several experienced photographers complained that their cameras malfunctioned only while pointing toward a specific section of forest visible from the observation tower. Batteries drained unexpectedly. Autofocus systems hunted endlessly without locking onto anything. Digital files occasionally became corrupted during the exact moments witnesses claimed the eyes had appeared. The deeper Ethan searched, the more one unsettling pattern emerged. Nearly everyone who claimed to see the eyes mentioned feeling watched long before they noticed anything unusual. They described an overwhelming certainty that something enormous was observing them from above. Not from behind a tree. Not from inside the woods. From somewhere impossibly high, where no animal should have been able to stand. Many ignored the sensation at first, assuming anxiety or imagination had gotten the better of them. Then they looked upward. That single decision changed everything. Ethan closed his laptop late one evening and stared silently through the window of his apartment. Rain tapped softly against the glass while the scanned newspaper articles remained scattered across his desk. For the first time in years, he found himself hesitating before accepting an investigation. It wasn't because he believed in monsters. It wasn't because he feared ghosts. It was because every credible witness described exactly the same impossible thing, and none of them seemed interested in becoming famous for it. 3 days later, Ethan loaded his cameras, audio recorders, drone equipment, extra batteries, camping gear, and satellite communication device into his SUV. Before sunrise, he began driving toward the Great Smoky Mountains, unaware that he was about to become part of a story that had waited decades for someone willing to listen. As the winding mountain roads climbed higher into the mist, Ethan noticed something peculiar. His GPS briefly lost signal before suddenly recalculating a route that led directly toward Clingmans Dome. At first, he dismissed it as poor reception. But then his dashboard clock flickered once, twice, and reset itself exactly 13 minutes behind the actual time. He reached for his phone to check the correct hour. There was no signal. Only a single audio notification appeared on the screen. An automatic recording app, one he never remembered turning on, had already begun capturing sound. And somewhere beneath the steady hum of his engine, something else was breathing. Ethan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as he glanced from the empty signal icon on his phone back to the winding road ahead. The recording application had somehow activated itself without his knowledge, its timer already showing 3 minutes and 17 seconds. He couldn't remember opening it. He couldn't even remember granting it permission to run in the background. Curious more than alarmed, he turned up the volume while the SUV continued climbing through the endless curves of Newfound Gap Road. At first he heard only the familiar sounds of his own vehicle, the tires rolling over rough pavement, the engine humming steadily beneath the hood, and the occasional rattle of equipment shifting in the back. Then another sound emerged beneath everything else. It was so faint that he almost dismissed it as interference. A slow inhale. A pause. Then a long, deliberate exhale that seemed far too deep to belong to any human being. He replayed the recording immediately. The breathing remained. It repeated with mechanical consistency, each cycle lasting nearly 15 seconds. Ethan rolled down his window, expecting the noise to disappear if it came from somewhere inside the vehicle. Cold mountain air rushed into the cabin carrying the scent of damp pine needles and wet stone. The forest outside looked perfectly ordinary. Birds darted between branches while sunlight struggled to pierce the thick morning fog. He listened carefully. Nothing. No breathing. No strange echoes. Only the whisper of wind moving through the trees. Yet when he checked the recording again, the unseen lungs continued their slow rhythm beneath every other sound. Somehow, the microphone had captured something his own ears could not hear. The realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Ethan had encountered electronic glitches before during investigations. Faulty microphones, corrupted memory cards, and random bursts of static were common enough to explain without invoking anything supernatural. But this felt different. The recording contained no distortion. The breathing was astonishingly clear once the volume increased. It sounded almost intimate, as though someone had been standing inches from the microphone the entire time. He stopped the playback and told himself there had to be a technical explanation. Perhaps the recorder's internal noise reduction software had produced an artifact. Perhaps the SUV's ventilation system had generated a low-frequency vibration. Whatever the answer, it would reveal itself eventually. By late morning he reached the parking area near Clingmans Dome. Even on a weekday, visitors wandered between their vehicles preparing backpacks and cameras for the short paved walk to the observation tower. Families laughed while children complained about the steep incline. Elderly couples admired the mountain air after long drives through the national park. Nothing about the scene suggested mystery or danger. It looked exactly like every travel brochure Ethan had seen during his research. He parked near the edge of the lot and began unloading his equipment, drawing occasional curious glances from tourists who assumed he was filming another nature documentary. As he organized his gear, an elderly park maintenance worker approached pushing a small utility cart loaded with trash bags and cleaning supplies. His faded uniform carried no ranger insignia, only a stitched name patch reading Harold. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent decades beneath mountain sun and winter snow. Harold nodded politely before his eyes settled on the collection of cameras strapped to Ethan's backpack. "Planning to film up there?" the old man asked. Ethan smiled. "That's the idea. I've heard a lot of stories about this place." Harold remained silent for several seconds, studying Ethan with an expression that seemed equal parts curiosity and concern. "You here for the views?" he finally asked, "or for the stories people tell after dark?" "The stories." The old man's shoulders sank almost imperceptibly. "They always come for the stories." Ethan expected a grin, perhaps a joke meant to entertain tourists. Instead, Harold's face remained completely serious. "You staying after sunset?" "If the weather holds." Harold glanced toward the tree line before answering. "Most folks leave before then. I noticed the park recommends it." "No," Harold replied quietly. "The park recommends it because the gates close." He paused. "I'm recommending it because I've buried friends." The words hung heavily between them. Ethan instinctively reached for his notebook. "Were they attacked by wildlife?" Harold shook his head. "That's what the report said." Before Ethan could ask another question, another maintenance worker called Harold from across the parking area. The old man turned to leave, then stopped after taking only 2 steps. "If you hear breathing," he said without looking back, "don't look up right away. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Harold's answer came almost as a whisper. Sometimes, it wants you to know it's there first. Then he climbed into the utility cart and drove away without another word. Ethan watched him disappear behind a row of parked vehicles, replaying the conversation in his mind. It sounded rehearsed, almost like a warning repeated too many times over the years. He considered chasing after the old man for clarification but decided against it. If Harold genuinely believed what he had said, pressing him further would likely accomplish little. If he had only been feeding local folklore, Ethan would uncover the truth soon enough. The paved trail leading toward the observation tower wound steadily uphill through dense spruce fir forest unlike anything found at lower elevations. Thick moss blanketed fallen logs while twisted branches disappeared into curtains of drifting fog. Every few minutes clouds rolled silently across the path, reducing visibility to only a few yards before clearing again. The effect transformed the landscape into something dreamlike, as though the mountain itself were breathing. Ethan mounted a small action camera to his shoulder strap and began narrating quietly for future editing. Time is 11:43 in the morning. Visibility changes every few minutes because of moving cloud cover. Temperature is approximately 58 degrees. No unusual environmental conditions so far. His voice sounded steady despite the lingering unease left by Harold's warning. About halfway to the tower he encountered several hikers descending much earlier than expected. Most smiled politely while passing, but one young couple appeared visibly shaken. The woman clutched her boyfriend's arm so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Ethan noticed tears drying on her cheeks. "Everything okay?" he asked. The boyfriend hesitated. "Yeah." The woman answered before he could continue. "No." She looked back toward the summit. "I thought someone was following us." "Did you see them?" She slowly shook her head. "I heard." She stopped herself. "Heard what?" Another long pause. "Nothing." Her boyfriend gently guided her down the trail. "We're fine," he insisted. "Enjoy your hike." Neither of them looked back. Ethan watched them disappear into the trees before quietly speaking into his camera again. Second unusual interaction today. Witness unwilling to describe what frightened her. He continued climbing. The higher he walked, the quieter the forest became. At first he welcomed the silence. Then he realized something was missing. Birdsong. Throughout the entire ascent he had heard almost no birds. No squirrels rustled through branches. No insects buzzed in the undergrowth. Even the wind seemed strangely muted, as though the forest were listening. He stopped walking. For nearly 30 seconds he remained perfectly still. Nothing moved. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt occupied. A sudden vibration against his chest startled him. His audio recorder. It had switched itself on. The tiny screen displayed active recording. Ethan frowned. He distinctly remembered turning every recorder off to conserve battery life until reaching the observation tower. Slowly, very slowly, he lifted the recorder toward his ear. At first, nothing. Then, barely audible, a long, measured inhale. Not from the recorder. From somewhere ahead. Deep inside the fog. And it was getting closer. Ethan froze where he stood, every instinct urging him to identify the source of the sound before taking another step. The fog ahead drifted lazily between the black trunks of the spruce trees, thick enough to hide anything more than 30 feet away. He held his breath, hoping the noise would reveal itself more clearly. For several seconds, the mountain remained completely still. Then it came again. A slow inhale. Long. Deliberate. Powerful enough that it almost resembled wind passing through a cavern, except there was no echo. It sounded organic, alive. The exhale followed several moments later, low and impossibly deep, vibrating through the air with a frequency Ethan felt more than heard. Tiny goosebumps raced across his arms. His rational mind immediately searched for explanations. A black bear. A moose. Perhaps distant machinery from a maintenance vehicle somehow carried by the mountain's unusual acoustics. But each possibility collapsed almost as quickly as it appeared. Bears didn't breathe with such perfectly measured rhythm. There were no roads beyond the trail. And whatever produced that sound seemed much larger than any animal native to the Great Smoky Mountains. Without realizing it, Ethan had stopped recording his narration. Instead, he simply listened. The breathing ceased. Silence settled over the forest once more. He waited another full minute before forcing himself to continue toward the summit. Every few steps he glanced over his shoulder. Nothing. To his left, endless trees disappeared into gray mist. To his right, the mountainside dropped sharply into a valley completely hidden beneath rolling clouds. The trail remained empty. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified with every yard he climbed. It wasn't ordinary anxiety. Ethan had experienced fear before while exploring abandoned hospitals, underground tunnels, and isolated mining camps. This sensation differed in one crucial way. He couldn't shake the certainty that whatever was observing him wasn't hidden somewhere among the trees. It was above them. The thought arrived so suddenly that he stopped walking again. Above. He almost looked upward. Then Harold's warning echoed inside his mind. If you hear breathing, don't look up right away. The memory was so vivid that Ethan instinctively lowered his gaze back to the trail. What exactly did you mean? He whispered to himself. No answer came. Only another wave of silence. When the observation tower finally emerged through the fog, Ethan felt an unexpected sense of relief. The concrete spiral structure rose from the mountaintop like an enormous gray ribbon twisting toward the sky. Several tourists stood near the railing taking photographs despite the limited visibility. A family laughed as children pointed excitedly into the clouds, disappointed that the famous panoramic view had vanished beneath dense fog. Normal people. Normal conversations. The ordinary sounds of visitors instantly eased the tension that had built during the climb. Ethan checked the time. 12:31 p.m. He had spent nearly 45 minutes covering a trail that usually required half an hour. He couldn't remember walking slowly. He simply had. Setting his backpack beside the tower, Ethan began assembling his equipment with practiced efficiency. 2 DSLR cameras faced opposite directions. An action camera remained clipped to his shoulder. He attached an external microphone equipped with a windscreen and positioned a portable audio recorder near the observation deck railing. If the mysterious breathing appeared again, he intended to capture it from multiple devices simultaneously. A middle-aged tourist wandered over, curious about the setup. "You making a documentary?" he asked. "Something like that." The man smiled. "You picked the wrong day for scenery. I wasn't really here for the view." The tourist laughed. "Oh, one of those ghost hunters. I prefer unexplained investigator." Same difference. He leaned against the railing before lowering his voice. "My wife swears she saw something strange up here about 20 years ago." Ethan immediately turned toward him. "What did she see?" The man's smile faded. "She won't talk about it anymore." "Would she be willing to?" "No." The answer came quickly. "She says talking about it gives it permission." Ethan blinked. "Permission for what?" The tourist shrugged. "I've stopped asking." Before Ethan could continue, the man's wife called him from the opposite side of the tower. He waved politely and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with another cryptic warning that sounded disturbingly similar to the others. Over the next 2 hours, conditions remained uneventful. The fog gradually lifted, revealing breathtaking layers of blue-green mountains stretching toward the horizon. Visitors came and went. Children posed for photographs. Birds finally returned, circling high above the observation tower. Ethan filmed scenic footage, interviewed several hikers about local folklore, and reviewed his equipment. Everything functioned perfectly. No breathing. No strange lights. No mysterious eyes. By late afternoon he began wondering whether the legends had simply grown from coincidence and imagination. Perhaps Harold's stories reflected decades-old tragedies unrelated to anything supernatural. Perhaps eyewitnesses had mistaken aircraft warning lights for glowing eyes. Perhaps. His thoughts stopped abruptly. One of his cameras beeped. Battery critical. Ethan frowned. Impossible. He had installed a fully charged battery less than 3 hours earlier. He removed it. The battery indicator displayed 0%. He inserted another. Within seconds. Battery critical. The second battery died just as quickly. Then the action camera attached to his backpack shut itself off. Followed by the external microphone. One by one. Every electronic device around him began losing power. Except one. The audio recorder. Its display remained fully illuminated. Recording. A soft breeze swept across the observation deck. Tourists barely noticed. But Ethan felt the temperature drop so sharply that his breath became visible. Someone nearby rubbed their arms. Did it just get colder? Another visitor nodded. Really cold. A child pointed toward the forest. Mom. The mother continued checking photos on her phone. What is it? The trees. What about them? They stopped moving. Several adults looked toward the surrounding forest. Every branch stood perfectly still. Not a single needle stirred. Yet the cold wind continued brushing across the observation tower. It moved around the people. Not through the trees. Ethan slowly reached for his recorder. The tiny screen showed strange spikes across the audio waveform. Not speech. Not wind. Breathing. Louder than before. Much louder. His headphones trembled with each inhale. He swallowed hard. Without thinking, he looked around for the source. Visitors continued chatting. No one reacted. The breathing seemed audible only through the recorder. Then, a little girl standing near the railing looked upward. Her smile vanished. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She simply stared into the sky with widening eyes. Ella? Her father touched her shoulder. No response. Ella? She slowly raised one shaking finger, pointing above the forest. Several people instinctively followed her gaze. One woman gasped. Another dropped her phone. A teenage boy whispered, "Oh, my God." Ethan's heartbeat thundered inside his chest. Against every warning. Against every instinct. He lifted his eyes toward the sky above the endless sea of treetops. And for the first time, he understood why no witness had ever been able to describe the experience without trembling. Because hanging impossibly high above the forest, far larger than any human could comprehend, were two enormous crimson eyes. Perfectly still. Perfectly silent. Watching every person on the observation tower. And the moment Ethan met their gaze, the breathing inside his recorder stopped. Only to begin. Directly behind him. Ethan did not turn around. Every instinct screamed at him to spin around, to identify whatever had moved behind him, but something far older and more primal held him perfectly still. It was the same instinct that tells a hiker not to startle a predator standing only a few feet away. His body understood the danger before his mind did. The breathing was no longer coming through the headphones. It was real. Close enough that warm air brushed against the back of his neck. Not hot. Not cold. Just unnaturally still, carrying a damp scent like wet stone left untouched for centuries. Around him, the observation deck had fallen into complete silence. The cheerful conversations were gone. No one was taking photographs anymore. No one laughed. The only sound was the slow rhythm of breathing that seemed to circle the tower without belonging to any visible creature. Ethan swallowed carefully. His pulse pounded so loudly that he wondered if everyone else could hear it. Very slowly, he shifted his eyes without moving his head. The people nearest him looked exactly as frightened as he felt. A teenage couple stood frozen beside the railing, unable to pull their eyes away from the sky. An elderly woman quietly crossed herself while whispering a prayer beneath her breath. A father wrapped both arms around his daughter, but neither of them moved. They simply stared upward. Every face carried the same expression. Not panic. Recognition. As though they were seeing something they had always known existed but had hoped never to encounter. The enormous crimson eyes remained suspended above the tree line. They did not glow like lights. They did not shine like reflections. Instead, they possessed a depth that no camera lens could have measured. Looking into them felt less like seeing an object, and more like standing before an endless abyss that happened to be looking back. Ethan forced himself to blink. The eyes never did. Then, without warning, every electronic device on the observation deck powered off simultaneously. Phones, cameras, smartwatches. Even the electronic information display near the entrance flickered once before its screen went black. A chorus of confused voices finally broke the silence. My phone died. What happened to the signal? My camera. It won't turn back on. Someone repeatedly pressed the power button on a professional DSLR. Nothing. Another tourist shook his phone violently. Dead. The only screen still glowing anywhere on the tower belonged to Ethan's audio recorder. Its battery indicator still showed full charge. The waveform on its display surged wildly. The breathing had become louder. Closer. Layered. Not one set of lungs. Several. Each inhaling at slightly different intervals. One. Then another. Then another. As if invisible creatures surrounded the tower from every direction. Ethan's hands trembled. "This isn't possible," he whispered. The recorder answered. Not with words. With another breath. Longer this time. Followed by something new. A faint clicking noise. Almost like fingernails tapping gently against stone. Tick. 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 The sound came from beneath the observation platform. Everyone heard it. People exchanged nervous glances. A little boy pointed downward. "Dad." His father stepped toward the center of the platform. "What is that?" The clicking continued. Slowly circling beneath them. Tick. 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 It completed one full lap around the tower. Then stopped. Silence returned. No one moved. Even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the mountain. Suddenly, a sharp burst of static erupted from Ethan's recorder. He nearly dropped it. The waveform exploded across the screen before settling into a perfectly straight line. Then a voice emerged. Not through the air. Only through the recorder's speaker. So quiet that Ethan almost believed he imagined it. "Don't." His eyes widened. He turned the volume higher. Static. Then again. "Don't." A woman's voice. Weak. Trembling. "Look." The recording crackled violently. "Away." The message ended with a piercing burst of interference. Ethan stared at the recorder in disbelief. The voice sounded real. Terrified. Not artificial. Not distorted enough to hide genuine emotion. Someone had spoken those words directly into the microphone. But when? He had only started recording that morning. There was no previous audio stored on the memory card. His thoughts raced. Unless the recorder hadn't captured a past recording. Unless it was recording something happening now. He slowly looked around the observation deck. No one appeared to have spoken. Everyone remained focused on the impossible eyes floating above the forest. Then Ethan noticed something even stranger. The shadows. The afternoon sun still hung above the mountains. Its light remained bright enough to cast clear shadows across the concrete platform. Except, none of the shadows matched. One tourist's shadow stretched east. Another's stretched south. Some shadows pointed in impossible directions. A few didn't connect to their owners at all. Instead, they leaned subtly toward the forest. As though being pulled. Ethan rubbed his eyes. The illusion remained. He lifted his own foot. His shadow hesitated. Only for a fraction of a second. Then copied the movement. His breathing caught in his throat. Shadows don't hesitate. A scream shattered the silence. Everyone turned. The teenage boy who had whispered, "Oh my God," moments earlier stumbled backward against the railing. He pointed upward with uncontrollable terror. "It's closer." People looked. The crimson eyes had moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Large enough now that individual details became visible. Dark veins spread through each glowing iris. The pupils were impossibly vertical. Like those of a reptile. Except each pupil alone appeared taller than the observation tower itself. Someone began crying. Another person dropped to their knees. A woman desperately tried calling emergency services despite her dead phone. Nothing worked. Then Ethan heard Harold's voice in his memory once more. "Sometimes, it wants you to know it's there first." First. The word suddenly carried a meaning he hadn't understood before. The eyes weren't the encounter. They were the warning. Something else was already here. The realization struck him like ice water. Slowly, very slowly, Ethan lowered his gaze from the sky. He looked toward the people surrounding him. One by one. He counted them. The family of 4. The elderly couple. The teenage hikers. The photographer. The married tourists. Then he frowned. There was one person standing near the far edge of the observation deck he didn't remember seeing before. A tall figure. Completely motionless. Facing away from everyone. Wearing a long dark coat despite the mild weather. No backpack. No camera. No hiking boots. Just polished black shoes. The figure hadn't been there moments ago. Ethan was certain of it. He instinctively raised his camera. Pressed the shutter. Nothing. Dead battery. He reached for the action camera. Dead. Only the audio recorder continued functioning. As if sensing his attention, the mysterious figure slowly tilted its head. Not enough to reveal its face. Just enough to show that it knew Ethan was watching. Then, without turning around, it spoke. Its voice carried effortlessly across the silent observation deck. Soft. Calm. Almost gentle. You looked into its eyes. Every person on the tower heard the sentence. Several turned toward the stranger. No one answered. The figure continued. So now. A pause. Long enough for Ethan's heart to pound twice. It knows yours. And at that exact moment, the giant crimson eyes above the forest blinked for the very first time. The instant the colossal eyes blinked, the entire mountain seemed to exhale. It wasn't an earthquake. The concrete observation tower did not shake, and no trees snapped in the surrounding forest. Yet every person standing on the platform felt the same strange sensation, a subtle shift beneath reality itself, as though the world had taken one enormous breath and held it. Then everything became unnaturally quiet. Even the invisible breathing stopped. The silence was so complete that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat echoing inside his ears. 1 beat. 2. 3. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. The mysterious figure at the edge of the observation deck remained perfectly still, his back still turned toward the crowd. The long black coat barely moved despite the breeze that had returned to the summit. Ethan slowly stepped forward. Who are you? No response. Another cautious step. How do you know about those eyes? The stranger remained silent for several seconds. When he finally answered, his voice sounded tired. Not frightened. Not excited. Simply exhausted. Because they looked at me once. Ethan stopped. The words were spoken with absolute certainty. What are they? Another pause. I spent 31 years asking that question. And? I learned the wrong one. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? The stranger slowly lifted one hand. A pale, withered hand covered in dozens of thin scars. You don't ask what they are. His fingers pointed toward the endless forest below. You ask. He lowered his hand. What they're waiting for. A chill swept through Ethan's body. Before he could ask another question, a loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere beneath the tower. Everyone jumped. It sounded like steel striking concrete. Once. Then again. Clang. Clang. The noise echoed upward through the spiral walkway. Someone was climbing the tower. Fast. Heavy footsteps followed immediately after. Each impact rang through the concrete. Thud. 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 Not the quick rhythm of a hiker. Each step landed slowly. Deliberately. As though whatever climbed the ramp possessed tremendous weight. Visitors instinctively moved away from the entrance. Several expected to see a late-arriving tourist appear around the curve. Instead, nothing. The footsteps continued. Closer. Thud. 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 They had reached the first level beneath the observation deck. Still no one appeared. Children began crying openly. One man shouted toward the entrance. Hello? No answer. Only another heavy step. Now directly beneath them. The concrete floor vibrated ever so slightly. A woman screamed. It's underneath us. The invisible footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Ethan instinctively glanced toward the stranger. The man in the black coat hadn't moved. He seemed to be listening. Then he quietly said, "Don't answer it." Ethan blinked. Answer who? The stranger slowly turned his head just enough for Ethan to glimpse part of his face. His skin looked unnaturally pale. His beard was streaked with gray. But it was his eyes that stole Ethan's attention. They were completely bloodshot. Tiny crimson veins covered nearly every inch of the whites. As though he hadn't slept in years. The stranger whispered, "It doesn't always use footsteps." Before Ethan could respond, someone called his name. Ethan. He spun around. No one nearby had spoken. Again. Ethan. This time the voice came from below the observation deck. It sounded familiar. Very familiar. His chest tightened. Impossible. It was his mother's voice. She had died 7 years earlier. Ethan. Gentle. Warm. Exactly as he remembered. Honey. Every hair on his arm stood upright. His rational mind rejected the possibility instantly. Stress. Auditory hallucination. Someone playing a cruel trick. There had to be an explanation. Yet the voice continued. I need your help. His breathing quickened. The stranger immediately looked toward him. What did you hear? Ethan hesitated. Nothing. The man's expression hardened. You heard someone. Ethan didn't answer. The stranger stepped closer for the first time. His movements were careful. Measured. Almost fearful. It knows your name now. A knot formed in Ethan's stomach. How? You looked back. I never told anyone my. The stranger interrupted. You don't understand. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. You don't tell it your name. It learns it. Before Ethan could ask what that meant, another voice echoed upward. Not from beneath the tower. From the forest. A little girl's laughter. Soft. Playful. Several tourists turned toward the trees. One mother gasped. My son? She took a step toward the trail. I hear my son. Her husband grabbed her arm. Our son's right here. The little boy clung to his father's leg, crying uncontrollably. But the woman stared toward the woods. Then who? The laughter came again. Closer. Children. More than one now. Dozens. Playing somewhere beyond the fog. Ethan looked around the observation deck. He wasn't the only one hearing familiar voices. An elderly man quietly whispered his late wife's name. A teenage girl covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Another visitor repeatedly muttered, My brother. My brother. The stranger closed his eyes. It's beginning. What is? It wants someone to come down. Why? Because it can't come up. Ethan stared at him. The sentence made no sense. Before he could question it, the giant crimson eyes above the forest slowly disappeared. Not by moving away. By closing. The enormous eyelids sealed shut. Darkness consumed the glowing red. The sky looked empty once more. Several people sighed in relief. It's gone. Thank God. We should leave. The moment those words were spoken, the breathing returned. Not above them. Not below them. Inside the trees surrounding the tower. Every direction. Hundreds of breaths. Perfectly synchronized. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. The forest itself seemed alive. Spruce branches began swaying. Not from wind. From something moving between them. Something impossibly large. Entire treetops leaned aside one after another. A path formed through the forest. Not on the ground. Across the canopy. As though an invisible body were walking over the tops of the trees. Toward the observation tower. Crunch. 100-foot pine bent sideways. Another followed. Then another. Each massive tree bowed beneath weight that could not be seen. People screamed. Phones remained dead. Cameras useless. No one could record what they witnessed. Only Ethan's audio recorder continued running. Its tiny red light blinked steadily. Recording everything. The stranger looked at the recorder. His face turned pale. You need to destroy it. What? Now? Why? Because it's listening through that. Ethan instinctively looked down. The recorder's screen had changed. The audio waveform was gone. Instead, words were slowly appearing across the display. One letter at a time. H. E. Tensed, Ethan stared in disbelief. Another letter. H. Then I. Then N. The screen finished spelling a single sentence. Hello, Ethan. His blood ran cold. Before anyone could react, the recorder spoke. Not with static. Not with breathing. But with Ethan's own voice. Perfectly copied. Perfectly calm. It said only one sentence. I can see you now. And somewhere deep inside the forest, something answered with a smile that no human eyes could yet see. Ethan's hand instinctively opened, and the recorder slipped from his fingers. It struck the concrete with a sharp crack. Everyone nearby flinched. The plastic casing split along one side, and one of the batteries bounced across the observation deck before disappearing beneath a bench. For a brief moment, Ethan thought it was over. No machine should survive that impact. No ordinary recorder would continue functioning after being dropped onto concrete from chest height. Yet the tiny red recording light never stopped blinking. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then the speaker crackled. Not with static. With laughter. It wasn't loud. It wasn't manic. It was the quiet laugh of someone who had just watched another person make a mistake. Ethan stared at the broken recorder. No one moved to pick it up. No one wanted to be the closest person to it. The stranger in the black coat slowly knelt beside the device. He did not touch it. Instead, he leaned close enough to read the display. His face immediately drained of color. "What does it say?" Ethan asked. The man remained silent. "What does it say?" Finally, he answered. "It isn't talking to you anymore." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What? It's talking?" The stranger slowly looked around the observation deck. To everyone else. Several tourists suddenly reached into their pockets. One after another, dead cell phones that had refused to power on only moments earlier illuminated by themselves. Black screens flashed white. Notifications appeared. No service. No signal. No applications running. Only text. Every screen displayed a different name. People froze. An elderly woman whispered, "That's my husband." A teenage boy stared at his phone in disbelief. "It says my sister's name." Another man dropped his device immediately after looking at it. His lips trembled. "No. No. My daughter." Every screen displayed someone the owner had lost. Someone they wished they could speak to again. Then the messages changed simultaneously. One sentence appeared beneath every name. "Come find me." A horrified silence swept across the tower. The woman who had earlier heard her son's voice burst into tears. "He needs me." Her husband grabbed her shoulders. "No. He's calling me." "That's not him. You don't know that." She shoved him away with surprising strength. "He needs me." Before anyone could stop her, she ran toward the entrance ramp leading back down the mountain. "Evelyn!" Her husband sprinted after her. Several visitors shouted for them to stop. The stranger in the black coat closed his eyes. Too late. The couple disappeared around the first curve of the spiral walkway. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, a scream. Raw. Primal. It echoed upward from somewhere below. Another scream answered it. Then complete silence. The husband came running back onto the observation deck alone. His face was white. His breathing came in violent gasps. "Evelyn." He couldn't finish the sentence. People crowded around him. "What happened? Where is she?" He simply pointed downward. His hands shook uncontrollably. "She?" His voice cracked. "She stepped off." Every conversation stopped. "What?" "There wasn't." He swallowed. There wasn't even a railing anymore. Confused expressions spread through the crowd. Everyone knew the spiral walkway was bordered by solid concrete barriers. You couldn't accidentally walk off it. The husband continued. "I saw her walking. She wasn't running anymore. She just..." He stared blankly toward the forest. "Kept following someone." "Someone?" "A little boy." The observation deck fell silent. He was standing ahead of her. The man's breathing became erratic. I couldn't see his face. He never turned around. He just kept walking. And she followed. Tears filled his eyes. Then, the walkway. He covered his face. It wasn't there. No one spoke. Because every person standing there understood what he meant. The walkway hadn't disappeared. Evelyn had simply believed it had continued. The stranger looked toward Ethan. "It doesn't force people. It invites them." Ethan's heart pounded. "You've seen this before." The man nodded slowly. "More than once." "Who are you?" For the first time, the stranger turned completely toward him. "My name?" He hesitated. "Used to be Daniel Cross." "Used to be?" Daniel gave a faint, bitter smile. "I stopped using it after the mountain learned it." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel looked toward the distant forest. "I came here in 1995. I was 24. There were 6 of us. We were graduate students. Anthropology. We came looking for Appalachian folklore." His eyes never left the trees. "Only I walked back out." A cold wind swept across the observation deck. Daniel continued. "At least, I think I did." No one interrupted him. "For years I believed whatever happened here had ended. I changed my name. I moved across the country. I never spoke about Clingmans Dome again." He looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "Then one morning, My daughter asked me. Who are the red eyes outside my bedroom window? Ethan felt his blood freeze. Daniel's voice barely remained steady. We lived in Arizona. No forests. No mountains. No reason. He paused. For them to find us. What happened? Ethan asked quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. She disappeared. Silence. No broken windows. No open doors. No footprints. Nothing. Just. He struggled to breathe. Her bed. And breathing. The word struck Ethan like a physical blow. Daniel continued. I searched for 12 years. I quit my job. I sold my house. I came back here. Every spring. Every autumn. Waiting. For what? Daniel's answer came almost immediately. For it? To look at me again. Before Ethan could process those words, the broken recorder laughed once more. This time everyone heard it. Not electronically. The sound echoed across the mountaintop. From the forest. From the sky. From beneath the tower. The same laugh. Coming from everywhere at once. Then every tree surrounding Clingmans Dome leaned in the same direction. Toward the observation tower. Branches groaned. Trunks bent. Thousands of trees. All pointing toward one place. Toward Ethan. Every remaining tourist slowly noticed. One woman whispered. It's looking at him. Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he quietly asked Ethan a question. When you first saw the eyes, what was the first thing you thought? Ethan blinked. What? The very first thought. He searched his memory. There had been fear. Confusion. Disbelief. But before all of those, one strange thought had flashed through his mind. A thought that hadn't even felt like his own. His mouth slowly opened. I thought. His voice trembled. They looked familiar. Daniel closed his eyes. As though he had expected exactly that answer. Oh no. What? Daniel took one slow step backward. You weren't chosen today. The words barely escaped his lips. You've been watched. For a very long time. At that exact instant, Ethan's recorder emitted one final tone. A new audio file had appeared automatically. Its timestamp was impossible. Recorded, October 14, 1987. Ethan had been born. In 1998. And beneath the file name was a title no one had created. First visit. Ethan felt every muscle in his body lock. He stared at the tiny screen of the damaged recorder, unable to comprehend what he was reading. The timestamp refused to make sense. October 14, 1987. 11 years before he was born. The file size continued changing as though something inside it were still recording. No one touched the recorder. No one wanted to. Daniel slowly crouched beside it again, careful not to let his shadow fall across the device. Ethan noticed that immediately. Why are you avoiding your shadow? He asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Ethan with an expression that suggested he had been hoping this question would never need to be asked. Because, Daniel whispered, sometimes it hides there. Ethan instinctively looked down. His own shadow stretched across the concrete toward the recorder. Perfectly ordinary. Or so it seemed. Then it moved. Not much. Only a few inches. But Ethan hadn't moved. Neither had the sun. The dark outline of his body slowly leaned toward the recorder as though reaching for it. His breath caught. No. Several people nearby noticed it too. A young photographer stumbled backward. Did you see that? Nobody answered. Because everyone had. Daniel spoke without taking his eyes off Ethan's shadow. Don't step on it. What? Your shadow. Daniel's voice remained calm. Keep your feet away from it. Ethan looked down in disbelief. That's impossible. I know. But do it anyway. Very carefully, Ethan shifted sideways without allowing his boots to touch the distorted edge of the shadow. The moment he did, the shadow stopped moving. It froze exactly where it was. Several seconds passed. Nothing happened. Daniel finally exhaled. It hasn't attached yet. Attached? Daniel ignored the question. Instead, he pointed toward the recorder. Play the file. Ethan hesitated. Are you serious? If we don't know what it wants. His voice hardened. We're already dead. The words hung heavily in the cold mountain air. With trembling fingers, Ethan picked up the recorder. The cracked screen flickered. The file remained there. First visit. Duration, midnight. As Ethan pressed play, the timer immediately changed. 0:01. 0:02. 0:03. The recording wasn't playing. It was beginning. A low hiss filled the speaker. Old analog tape noise. Then, wind. Children laughing somewhere nearby. Birds. Footsteps on gravel. The sound quality resembled a cassette recorder from decades ago. A man's cheerful voice interrupted the ambience. "Come on, buddy. We're almost there." Ethan frowned. The voice sounded strangely familiar. Not identical, but similar enough to make his chest tighten. Another voice answered. Younger. Female. "I told you bringing him was a bad idea." The man laughed. "He'll be fine. He's asleep." Ethan's heartbeat accelerated. He glanced toward Daniel. The older man's face had become completely expressionless. The recording continued. A car door slammed. Someone picked up a child. The tiny laugh of a toddler echoed through the speaker. Then, the man spoke again. "One day, I'm going to bring you back here when you're old enough to remember." Ethan's blood turned to ice. Without realizing it, he whispered, "My father?" Daniel looked at him sharply. "What?" Ethan barely heard him. The voice. It wasn't merely similar. It was his father's. Younger. But unmistakable. His father had always told Ethan he had never visited the Smoky Mountains before retirement. He had insisted their family had never been anywhere near Tennessee when Ethan was a child. Yet here he was, speaking inside a recording allegedly made before Ethan existed. The audio crackled. The wind intensified. Then another sound emerged beneath everything else. Breathing. The same slow, measured, impossible breathing. The cheerful conversation stopped instantly. Silence. Then Ethan's father's voice returned. Much quieter now. "Do you hear that?" His wife answered. "Hear what?" "The breathing." A pause. "I don't hear anything." Another pause. Then, "I think." His father spoke more softly. "Someone's watching us." Static exploded through the speaker. The recording distorted violently. For several seconds nothing but harsh interference filled the air. Then, a child giggled. Not from the recorder. From somewhere behind Ethan. Every person on the observation deck spun around. No child stood there. Only empty concrete. Yet the laughter continued. Closer now. Moving between the people. Invisible. A little girl gasped. "Mom, what?" "Someone just touched my hand." Her mother immediately pulled her close. "No one touched you." "Yes." The child stared at her fingers. They were cold. Daniel suddenly shouted. "Everyone stand together." His command surprised everyone. Without understanding why, the remaining tourists instinctively gathered into a tight group near the center of the platform. Daniel looked around rapidly. "Count." "What?" "Count everyone." People exchanged confused glances. Daniel repeated himself louder. "Now." A man quickly began counting. 1, 2, 3. He pointed at each person. 10, 11, 12. He stopped. His forehead creased. "There are 13. A woman frowned. "No. There were only 12 of us." Silence. Everyone counted again. Slowly. Carefully. Still. 13. Nobody recognized the extra person. Because nobody could identify who wasn't supposed to be there. Every face seemed familiar. Every person appeared ordinary. Backpacks. Hiking clothes. Camera straps. Nothing unusual. Yet somehow, there was one too many. The realization spread through the group like poison. People began introducing themselves frantically. "My name's Carl." "I'm Megan." "Josh." "Linda." "Ethan." "Daniel." The introductions continued. Every name sounded normal. Every face looked frightened. Still, there were 13. Daniel whispered. "It's hiding." "Who?" "The one nobody remembers arriving." A terrible thought crossed Ethan's mind. What if? He looked around the group. "One of us isn't human?" Nobody answered. Because no one wanted to accuse anyone else. The silence stretched. Then the extra person spoke. very softly. Almost politely. "I'm sorry." Every head turned. An elderly woman stood near the back of the group. She looked utterly confused. "I don't remember." She frowned. "Walking up here." People stared at her. She continued. "I was." Long pause. "I was in my kitchen." Another pause. "Wasn't I?" Her eyes slowly filled with panic. "I?" She looked around helplessly. "Where am I?" Daniel's face drained of all color. He stepped backward. "No." The old woman looked at him. "Do I know you?" Daniel whispered something Ethan barely heard. It found another door. The elderly woman suddenly stopped speaking. Her expression went blank. Completely blank. Then, in a voice that was far too deep to belong to her frail body, she smiled. And said only 4 words. "I remember you, Daniel." The elderly woman's smile remained frozen, impossibly wide, while every person on the observation deck stood rooted in place. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The deep voice that had emerged from her frail body did not sound human. It carried the weight of something ancient, something that had waited far longer than any person could imagine. Daniel's face revealed a terror unlike anything Ethan had seen before. This was not the fear of someone witnessing the impossible for the first time. This was the fear of someone who had spent decades running from a nightmare, only to discover that the nightmare had never stopped following him. Ethan slowly realized that Clingmans Dome was never haunted by a creature hiding in the forest. The mountain itself was a doorway, and the enormous crimson eyes were not a monster searching for victims. They were the watchful gaze of something guarding the threshold, patiently waiting for someone to look back. The recorder, still lying cracked on the cold concrete, emitted one final, quiet breath before its red recording light faded forever. For the first time since Ethan had arrived on the mountain, complete silence settled over the summit. The crimson eyes had vanished from the sky. The invisible footsteps had ceased beneath the tower. The breathing in the trees was gone. Yet somehow, the silence felt even more terrifying than the sounds that had come before. Ethan understood why every witness who had survived refused to speak about what they had seen. Some horrors do not end when you escape them. They begin the moment they learn who you are. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the endless ridges of the Great Smoky Mountains, Ethan looked one final time toward the dark forest below. Nothing stared back at him. Nothing moved. But deep inside, he knew with absolute certainty that somewhere beyond the tree-line, hidden behind the ancient mist, something had memorized his face, and it would never forget it. If the legends surrounding Clingmans Dome are nothing more than folklore, then perhaps Ethan's experience was only the product of fear, exhaustion, and the mountain's strange atmosphere. But if even a fraction of these stories are true, then the next time you find yourself standing above an endless forest after sunset, and an unexplainable silence falls around you, resist the urge to look up. Because some things don't need to chase you. They don't need to touch you. All they need is for you to meet their gaze, just once. And if that ever happens, remember the warning whispered by those who never truly escaped: when the mountain begins to breathe, leave before it learns your name. Thank you for joining me for another journey into America's darkest mysteries. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another chilling tale hidden within forgotten places and unexplained legends. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and if you ever visit Clingmans Dome after sunset, whatever you do, don't look back.